It was an unusually warm summer evening in the small town of Willowdale. The sun had just set behind the tall trees that lined the main street, casting long shadows across the pavement. In a quaint little cafe on Elm Street, two strangers sat at a small table by the window. Emily, a young woman with piercing green eyes and curly brown hair, sipped her tea while staring out into space. Across from her, James, a tall man with a strong jawline and piercing blue eyes, watched her intently. They had met just an hour ago, when Emily had accidentally spilled coffee on the table next to them. Apologetic smiles had been exchanged, and they had struck up a conversation. As the minutes ticked by, their teacups remained untouched, but their gazes never wavered from each other's faces. The air in the cafe grew thick with an unsettling silence, as if time itself was holding its breath. Emily began to feel a creeping sense of unease, her eyes darting nervously towards James' face. His expression had changed, his blue eyes now seemed darker, more piercing. Suddenly, without warning, James spoke up, his voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for this moment." The words sent shivers down Emily's spine as she felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She tried to look away, but James' gaze held hers captive, drawing her back in with an otherworldly force. As the teacups sat untouched before them, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. They were no longer strangers, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cafe's patrons began to stir, sensing something was amiss, but it was too late. Emily had already sipped from her cup, not of tea, but of James' dark intentions. Emily had always been drawn to the quaint little cafe on Main Street. She loved its warm atmosphere and the way it smelled like freshly baked pastries wafting from the oven. On this particular afternoon, she decided to step inside and order a cup of tea. As she waited for her drink, Emily noticed an elderly man sitting at a small table by the window. He seemed lost in thought, staring blankly into space with his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the glass. She felt a shiver run down her spine as their gazes met, but he merely looked up and smiled weakly before returning to his reverie. When Emily received her tea, she took it outside to sit at an empty table by the garden wall. As she sipped her warm liquid, she began to feel a creeping sense of unease. The elderly man appeared beside her, his eyes now gleaming with an unsettling intensity in the fading light. "I've been waiting for you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chirping birds. Emily tried to stand up and leave, but her legs felt heavy as lead, as if rooted to the spot. The old man leaned closer, his breath cold against her ear. "You see, I've made a cup of tea just like yours, with your name on it." As he spoke, Emily noticed that the leaves in her own cup had changed from Earl Grey to something dark and foreboding, as if they were being rewritten before her very eyes. She realized then that she was trapped in this strange encounter, bound by a thread of tea-scented fate, forever stuck between two strangers, with no escape. As I sat in the small cafe, sipping my lukewarm tea, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The stranger sitting across from me seemed pleasant enough at first glance, a kind face and warm smile. But as our conversation progressed, I began to notice something odd about him. At first, it was just the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, even when there were no one else in sight. Then, he started asking questions that felt almost invasive. He'd ask me about my daily routine, what I did for work, and where I lived, all things a stranger shouldn't be so interested in. And yet, the more we talked, the more comfortable I became. But it was when he asked to join us for another cup of tea that I realized something was terribly wrong. His eyes seemed to gleam with an unsettling intensity as he leaned forward and said, "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." Suddenly, my unease turned into full-blown fear. What did he mean? And why did the air in the cafe seem to grow colder? As I watched him take another sip of his tea, mine still untouched on the table, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a faint smile spreading across his face as if it was contagious. The stranger's eyes locked onto mine, and for an instant, we shared a moment of eerie understanding. And in that moment, I knew I had to get out of there before he decided to make our tea drinking ritual into something far more sinister than just a friendly chat over cups of tea.